Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I am your host for today, Priscillia Charles, and I'm joined today in Studio 1 by Garry Connolly. Welcome, Garry.
Hello, Priscilla.
Thank you so much for being here with us today.
That's
really
wonderful.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And Garry is the founder and president of Host in Ireland. And let's just move on and get onto the show and get to know Garry. Can you tell us a little about yourself, about your background, please?
Sure. I'm a technologist, really. I think I'd be classified as a digital optimist. And I think that's the best way to overall give a headline of who I am. But currently I'm the president and founder of Host in Ireland, which is a really great initiative that we started about 5 years ago. I call it a co-opetition. It started as a bet in a pub, as all great ideas do in Ireland particularly. And I was challenged by a number of my ex-competitors that I couldn't get them all to work together. And I said, I could get you to work together. My challenge will you pay me to get you to work together?
That's brilliant.
So Host in Ireland effectively is a gathering of all of the data hosting companies that are international actually, but resident in Ireland to work together in a collaborative way to sell a common message. And I think whether it's localization or whether it's pharmaceuticals or whether it's data, when you get conflicting views of any particular subject matter, whilst it's great for dialogue, it can be very, very confusing for the end user. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think it was great 5 years ago when we said, okay, there must be commonality.
Yes.
And can we just agree on the commonality? And if we can get that agreed, then we can at least be clear with the end user. And then you can fight with each other afterwards when they say, oh, I now understand what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
So that's what I do currently. But I have some other things that I've done in the past,
yes,
which might be of interest.
You studied commercial computer programming and civil engineering, I understand. And what attracted you to those fields in the first place?
I guess it's all context to the time and place. When I came out of school and college in 1982, globally, if you were to say to somebody a personal computer, it would be a bit like saying you will be going to Mars in 2025. So at that time I took the view I really wanted to be a physical education teacher.
Oh, fantastic.
I really, more than anything else. However, I know this is a global audience, but we have Gaelic in Ireland, mm-hmm. and I could speak about 4 words of Gaelic. And unfortunately, it was the prerequisite to be a teacher was that you must speak Gaelic. So once I couldn't speak that, I had to look at, well, what else do I understand? And I sort of understood slightly theodolites, and they're the things that people use to level off ground for buildings.
Okay.
So once I understood what that was, I got into, it was actually a civil engineering subset called geosurveying. So all the work done in preparation of buildings and roads and services.
That all makes sense.
And that was the journey because we had a Commodore 64 in the corner on our course. We brought in our tape drives and we put them in, and the only thing to be mindful of wasn't hackers or wasn't GDPR in those days. It was whether you walked by a very large magnetic source, because if you had a tape and you walked by a magnetic source, no longer was your project. Mm-hmm. So it was a bit like the dog has eaten my homework. If you hadn't got it done, you used to say, I went by a really large magnetic force on the back of a truck. And that was actually, I really liked that. And that's why I said, I absolutely don't want to be a geosurveyor, but I want to be something to do with that Commodore. And so I went on to do COBOL, commercial computer programming. And that's how I ended up wanting to pursue a career. I was speaking to Simon earlier and yourself about when I think back about commercial computer programming, COBOL, RPG and all these things. We did most of our work on mainframes, and it wasn't until I left that I didn't become a COBOL programmer. I worked on personal computers, mm-hmm. which weren't invented when I was in college. So all this talk now that we see about 35% of blue-collar, white-collar jobs are mm-hmm. for industries and jobs that haven't been invented yet. I just think it's an evolution of that.
Absolutely, yes.
So personal computers has me sitting here.
Wow, what a journey.
Yeah.
And then you worked in sales and telecoms and then founded Host in Ireland. So a long journey, and
I was never very good at technology, but I was always very good, I felt, at finding and eking out people who understood it, trying to understand what problem they were trying to solve, and then trying to create a platform where the people who knew the stuff and the people that needed solutions could come together.
which is very important.
And that's sort of, I worked that out even with local area networks and stuff, because I think even now, brilliant people are so brilliant that sometimes they forget that we're not all that brilliant. We don't understand a lot of where they're bringing us. So you got to go in little small steps. And when you know that saying, to speak to people like you're a 4-year-old, it really helps when you are a 4-year-old in a 50-year-old's body, right? Because you think that way. And I think that was the bit I got early. I said, okay, well, I'm a really bad programmer. You know, I don't have the discipline. But there are brilliant programmers, but they just can't sit still and listen. Well, what's your problem? That's what I always thought I was good at. So Hosting Ireland is a natural evolution of that. Plus, bet me a few quid and I'll take a punt on occasion. So
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And speaking of which, I'd like to talk about the organization core values. So I understand that the organization has 5 core values, the 5P: policy, pedigree, people, power, and pipes. Can you expand a little bit on those values, and about their importance?
okay, well, I think the common ground that we in this room and the audience would have is data. And when you consider that we're in now firmly in the 4th Industrial Revolution, it's called the digital revolution, and the equivalent of the let's call it the coal or the steam in the 1st and 2nd revolution
Yes.
is data. It's the oxygen
Absolutely.
of the 4th Industrial Revolution. So when you consider that there's not a single industry, whether it's from agriculture right the way through to social, and it's all driven by data, then you have to look at, okay, well, if that's going to be the core of what we're doing, we're going to generate it, we're going to distribute it. What's the most important thing then? Knowing that that's going to come, and it's going to come in a tsunami, is its security. So when we started Hosting Ireland, we said, okay, let's take it as a given that we've loads of data, and we've loads of different types of data. Let's try and simplify our message to people who think they understand data, but really it's I'm very good at data, but I know spreadsheets, or I'm
Yes.
very good at data and I know databases. Because we're now at a different level of data with all
Absolutely.
different machines creating. So we came out with the 5 Ps, which was really about, well, why would you bring data anywhere? Because it's all about trust. And as we evolve now, it's about you owning your data or not owning your data, or understanding who owns your data.
Yes.
So we built this framework, I guess, of policies, pedigree, people, power, and pipes. And when you blend that up, policies are, what's your policy in Ireland, in our case here, towards data? Who owns it?
Yes.
Pedigree. Can you demonstrate to me that you understand my question before you give me an answer? And that goes back to, in our case in Ireland, foreign direct investment, which is a very large part of our infrastructure here. We've been doing that for 60 years. And IBM, in fact, came here in the 50s. Not too far away from here, actually. We talk about space and accommodation for businesses and people to live at the moment being at one of our challenges. They couldn't get an office in Dublin in 56, so they took the top floor in the Shelbourne Hotel.
Wow.
So, again, that is ingrained in our pedigree. And when we look then at Microsoft 20 years ago, next week, Ireland was recognised as the largest exporter of software in the world.
Wow.
20 years ago
Yes.
on a floppy disk.
So what is it today?
Ireland now is Europe's largest exporter of software, but the floppy disk has just got really big, and it's now in a data centre.
Wow.
So when you're trying to talk to people, you try to say, well, what's this data centre? Has that been dropped off the sky? No, it's like 1 billion, trillion, quadrillion floppy disks. It's how we store, how we compute, how we distribute data. And rather than walking around with a whole big box of 3.5 or 5.25 floppies, we put it on our hand in a device with gigabytes. But everywhere, and it's the easiest way to talk about data centres, is anywhere you see smart in front of a word, you have a data centre behind. because that's driving the oxygen of the Industrial Revolution.
Of course.
So the 5 Ps, yeah, it's sort of a metric where you say, well, if you can demonstrate all them, And that's what I tried to get across, as I said earlier, to the competitors as a co-opetition. Let's agree on those fundamental tenets of our backbone, and then your one is a little greener or bluer, but let's agree on those, and that makes it much easier then to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, especially that your organization partners with some of the biggest and national and international data centers.
Yeah.
So the collective really created by Host and Island mean that, well, what does it mean for other companies that handle digital assets nowadays? It's very important and very beneficial to them, really.
Yeah, and I also think that there's not enough collaboration. We're uber connected now. But the uber connectedness has actually made us less connected on a human basis.
It's true.
I think we're digitally more connected.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 daughters, 10 years old and 16, and they tell me they talk to me every day. And I say, how do you mean? Well, I WhatsApped you.
Mm-hmm.
I sent you an emoji. All right, so that's what you mean by
Mm-hmm.
talking. And that's, you know what, when I was thinking about this before the interview, I think we celebrated our 5th anniversary this year, and I was asking some of the guys, so why did you stay involved? It was just great to be able to have a chat. It was great to be able to, because professionals, we forget this as well. When you're a senior person in a very large organisation, no matter where you are, you can suffer from professional loneliness, because you're meant to know the answers. You're meant to know the answers to your top tier,
Yes.
and you're meant to know the answers for your colleagues.
Yes.
So bringing people together and saying, okay, all I ask you to do, and I think Simon, your colleague, does this very well as well. He asks, okay, when we come into the room, just drop your ego and drop your own balance sheet just for a second, and let's talk about the issues. Now, you can beat each other up outside, but just now, and that creates this, okay, because the more people
Relationship, yeah.
relationships, exactly, and the more people talk, oh, you're having that as well, I'm having that too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because ultimately, we got to, and I think it's starting with the dress code. I always felt, I haven't worn a tie, thank goodness, in 25 years, but now most people are derobing, because the suit of armour,
Yes.
people aren't that way at the weekend when they're watching the football.
More casual, yeah.
They're more, but so I think that is helping too, because the technology now, we have to know, is there. The inhibitors are policies and people.
Mm-hmm.
Are we comfortable with that? So I think data is the real magic, even though I'm in the data center
What
industry,
connects people.
which tends to be more the centers, the big buildings that you see, but the real magic's in the data. So hopefully people who have better social intercourse skills and communication skills one-on-one will still be sought after. Otherwise, I'm goosed.
No faith in humanity whatsoever. And you founded and were co-chairman of the GDPR Awareness Coalition in 2017.
Yeah.
GDPR is such an important topic nowadays, and coming into action of May of 2018. What do you think? How did the transfer of data between Ireland and the rest of the world really was affected in your view since it came into action?
That's a great question. Can I just go back before?
Yeah.
Again, the whole purpose of the GDPR Awareness Coalition was I understand about 2 words in GDPR, but what I do know, and I did realise a year or 18 months before, was that it's a very, very technical, and we're finding out now it's even more technical, but the people that are going to be most affected actually aren't the ones of the big corporates that are lawyered up. It's going to be the shop. It's going to be the not-for-profit organisation. And they were terrified of talking to legal people, or they couldn't afford it.
Yes.
So what we did was we set up this GDPR Awareness Coalition, which was like-minded people, and we set ourselves one objective. Let's get 100 easy-to-understand infographics. Your brain only computes 6 points, and we even looked at, what are the colours should it be? And let's see if we took all the people who have all the technical know-how, and we were able to write one. If you are a shopkeeper, 6 points to know of. If you are in a GAA or soccer club, 6 points to know of. And it just was to raise awareness that this thing is coming, just be aware of it. And of course, because I think we simplified it slightly, it just was a wonderful success. The second point that you make about Ireland, Data is a really interesting, it's often referred to, as you know, as the new oil.
Yeah.
Usually by people who are so ignorant to either industry. Because there has never been, and there always has been, data. It's been the most important thing. But what's the most important thing about data? Being able to understand it. And I always use the guys, the Indians. How did they win battles against in North America? Because they could read the smoke signals. It wasn't because they were doing smoke signals, it's because they could interpret it and read it. So, that's why they developed, but that's data, and then you've Morse code and then other forms. So in terms of the effects of GDPR, the effects of all of it, it's just brought to people's attention and to the most important community, the end user. Because we don't make it that hard for people to manipulate our data, to breach our data, to then, because still the number one password for consumers is password.
Password, yeah.
So it makes people much more mindful that we can put firewalls in place and we can put policies in place and we can do all of this. But let's start here with ourselves. So what am I doing to protect my data? And the fact now that you're starting to see some significant fines cross industry. I don't know if you even saw it today, but BA, British Airways, 220 million.
Yes. Because
they didn't have basics in place to protect the credit cards. And it's sad that it had to happen, but I'm nearly more glad it's happened to not a tech company, because they're coming.
Of course, yeah.
Because it was always Facebook and it was always Google and it was always Snapchat, then everybody say, oh, well, it's them. But this is BA, an airline, And I saw one other was an agricultural company in Paris were giving out wrong information about the farmers. So it's not just for the big guys.
Yes, it's not for the tech companies.
To simplify it, I just think that anything you apply retrospectively is a nightmare. You're way too young to remember, but 1979 in Ireland, we decided in our wisdom that safety belts were compulsory. You had to have a safety belt on the 1st of January. And that's okay if you're buying a new car tomorrow, but what if you've got an old car? We had an Austin Morris Minor, 6 kids. It wasn't great. So that's why it's such a challenge, because we've got to look retrospectively at all the data. But in 20 years, we look back and go, oh, not only have I a safety belt, but I've got side impact bars and I've got exploding steering wheels, because we'll evolve into it.
Of course, yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
But with regard to Ireland, I think that as we're finding more and more, particularly with respect to the changes in policies in the UK, that our alignment with the European Union has and always, to this date, has always been very positive for somebody who is a 4 to 4.5 million population.
Yes.
With very few natural resources. Probably our biggest natural resources are people. If we're being honest, our innovativeness and our... I always wonder about the 11.5% of North Americans that call themselves Irish. I mean, I say, is that biologically possible? But I think that, when you're a small population and you can only affect things a certain way, an alignment, it's not always rosy, is it?
No,
Same way as we have a sport in Ireland called GAA, it's football. And on any given Sunday, the Kerry fellas don't agree with the Dubs and the Dubs don't agree with the guys from Galway. But in general, I think there's this general agreement that we are better complying or being part of or influencing a bigger pot on most things.
Yeah. And we're talking about Ireland and other countries. Now Brexit is coming into effect, and obviously it's going to impact a lot of countries, especially in the EU. So according to your latest Host in Ireland quarterly report, if I'm quoting you, inward investment from the data center industry since 2009 is now expected to top 10 billion by 2022, with annual investment holding firm at 1.3 billion. So in your opinion, has Brexit changed a lot for the data hosting industry? I mean, a lot of the world's biggest brands already host their content in Ireland. So why Ireland is such an attractive location, there must be some sort of correlation. Brexit will have an impact of Ireland.
Yeah, but big business and business in general doesn't like uncertainty in any way, or in our own lives, you might be getting married on Saturday if the priest turns up. It's not great. So uncertainty is something that always gets people to be hesitant, and it hasn't certainty hindered Ireland. As to how much it's affected, I mean, there's a lot. Pick up the paper this morning. We still don't know what type of border we're going to have, both digital
True.
and physical.
Yes.
So there are certain industries, but in terms of Ireland's commitment, and I think this is more. Let's concentrate what's within our control, and let's be mindful, participate, and put our. It's like anything in business, Let's concentrate what we can control, and Ireland, I think, is, as I said earlier, I think we have demonstrated, and I think in general, without question, the population is pro-Europe. So once we're pro-Europe, that is who we're exporting to. And I think that's, I mentioned earlier about the floppy disk.
Yes.
It's hard sometimes for people to understand Ireland, 4.5 to 5 million people, the largest software exporter in the world, the second largest fund management company in the world, the third largest drug distribution company or whatever. There's only 4.5 million. It's all for export. So in terms of the data that's residing in our centres, it's actually not for home consumption. It's for the 550 million. So, then you have to basically, okay, well, we can control that. Well, how can we control it? Let's build more networks around the UK. Because whilst we live in a very virtual world where everything, Wi-Fi and 4G and 5G, behind all that is bricks and mortar.
Of course.
The cloud really isn't something that lives up in the sky. It physically lives somewhere. So I think we're still in these uncertain times. We've a really strong, and this is key, and I think English speaking primary was explained to me recently better than ever by a US guy. He said, the reason that we're doing so much with you guys is that everybody speaks English until there's a problem.
So then it's Irish?
And then I said, how do you mean? He said, look, I go to holiday and I go to Puerto Rico and I go to Cuba and everybody speaks great English until there's a problem. And then nobody speaks English. So he said that's one of the advantages of knowing that's you can't hide. But Brexit is bad news for everybody. I think even the British now, in general, they've wasted 2 years, 3 years of so much discussion about it, I've in-laws there, and it divided families and stuff,
Yeah, it is.
So I think Ireland is fairly well straight and committed towards pro-Europe. I don't think we're going to have an ears it anytime soon.
It is. It's quite a.
Where are you from?
I'm French.
You're French?
Yes.
So you're quite pro-Europe?
Yes, I would say France is quite pro-Europe, yes. But it's a debate, it's a constant debate since the results of the poll, of course. So yes, I think, France would tend to be pro.
Yeah.
But obviously it depends on the political party that the political preferences of everyone.
And I think our generation were meant to be the generation that we're going to open up more opportunities for the next gang. And we've just complicated it, haven't we? Because I think one of the things that I learned when I talk to my 10-year-old and 16-year-old is that they want to collaborate more. They want to work wherever they feel they'll be happiest and they'll get the best return. And it's not always about money, as you know. So now we've suddenly put these walls, or is that a Trumpism? We've put these walls in different places. So it's counter to what maybe they're trying to achieve. I see cars outside here that I can hire by the hour, and scooters I can hire. I don't want to own anything. I want to be flexible. And that's sort of, maybe it's the old guard. We're holding back a bit more. I'm not sure. But it just brings more uncertainty into things.
Absolutely.
And we've just wasted 5 minutes of a great conversation about something we've no control over.
This is the way it goes. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about, so we're talking about the impact of Brexit, and obviously the data hosting landscape is changing a lot because of Brexit, because of different things. Now, what about other factors such as renewable energy, for instance? How would this impact the data industry?
And I think that's the key question now, is how sustainable. Not so much. We know we're going to create. To give some context to this discussion about the amount of data, right? We have currently estimated in the region of probably about 25 billion things connected to what we commonly call the internet. And that by 2025, that will be in the region of 250 to 280 billion. And by the end of next decade, it'll be 1 trillion. Okay? If it was a grain of rice, if a piece of data or a byte of data or one of the smallest denominations was a grain of rice, there will be over 250 Pacific oceans of data created every year from 2022 onwards. And it has to go somewhere. So when we discuss then, well, where is it going to go? Well, it's actually going to go where the most appropriate place is to have it. And as we see now, and again, it's probably easier to relate it to stuff people understand more. If we were in a solicitor's office here this morning, we would have a requirement by the solicitors to hold certain amount of paperwork for so many years. So let's say it was a legal contract for a house. You have to statutorily hold on to that for 7 years. But I'm paying 80 to 90 euros per square foot in this very elaborate office. After a while, when you don't need that data, you put it somewhere else, like into a storage out on the ring road in Paris. You don't hold it down. And so we're now entering a stage where we understand not all data is the same. Some data, it needs to be very close to the autonomous car. I can't go halfway around the world to come back. So we're now getting these concentric circles of when I really need it, it sits there, like the paperwork of the current file that I'm working in the legal firm, but the one that we worked on 3 years ago, or the 4th page on Facebook from 5 years ago. Oh, we put that somewhere else. So the key thing is that there's so much data. There's so much different types of data. And that is the analogy I use is the rice, the Pacific, but it's not all one boiled rice. It's special fried rice, and it's basmati rice, and it's all that squashed together. And your job in what you guys do and what we do is to keep it secure and make sense of it. So I think one of the terms that I'm hearing now, and maybe in you guys, because you are always great for giving me little terms, is we're in a world of little data, not big data. Because the big data is the problem, the little data is the magic. So all that we're looking and all the tools is keep the big data secure, all of it, because we might need it. But really what we should be focusing on is the little data, which is the bit that actually drives the business. In terms of the challenges of Ireland versus anywhere else, the brands are pretty much the same. Globally now, whether we like it or not, it's Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Alibaba, Baidu and Tencent. They are the 5 to 10 computers that will be the 5 to 10 computers that we will all use in the future. And I only saw yesterday Netflix, for instance. Netflix is 100% Amazon. They outsource everything to Amazon. So they're getting bigger. Dropbox is all, So in terms of the physical security, the virtual security, the infrastructure security, these guys are just building the same standards all over the world. And I think in Ireland, because we have it in our pedigree or our DNA, whether it was a floppy disk in the 80s or whether it's the cloud now, and there's some really great stuff coming down the pipe with renewable energy, and that's the key thing. I think we owe it to data centers get a lot of criticism because of the pure consumption of energy. There's no doubt data centers are run by electricity, and now the industry has gone to a renewable first. Again, getting back to it's brand new builds, so they can do that. But the second thing is, as I said earlier, anywhere you've got smart in front, you've a data center in the back. So when you consider that smart thermostats, smart efficient grids, smart cars, smart this, that and the other, is one of the byproducts to reduce its carbon footprint.
Yes.
Well, guess what? It's being run by data that's in the centre. So ultimately, what is it? It's the centre.
Kind of balances, yeah.
Well, that's the objective is that data is good. The centres need to, again, retrospectively it's hard, but any of the new stuff, which is the real tsunami as we've gone through the numbers, are nearly all green, renewable first. And I'd like to think, and you would like to think, that it's because of the companies, but it's actually in sentiment from inside the companies. People want to be working for more socially responsible companies, but unfortunately, like all these things, it's the investors.
Is the investors.
Investors now, there's so much money wants to just invest in corporate social because that's the thing to be investing in at the moment. And if that's the catalyst that makes these guys all use renewable only, then it's good for Ireland because they are the consumer of a considerable amount of energy, which drives the demand, which then drives into the supply. And one of the things that's in our national plan now is if we are to deliver the green renewable energy for data centres first, then we need to really get our act together and increase the amount of energy on our grid, which is a very positive thing.
It is.
Because money makes the world go round, and when you've got investors that won't invest in companies that aren't socially responsible,
this is
it
becomes an issue.
I think
of course,
so.
yes.
I think so.
So we're talking about a lot of global companies, and you are a regular speaker at conference throughout the globe. You've won a Think Global Forum Community Awards in 2017, and you spoke at the Think Global Forum Technology in March of 2018. I'm quoting you when you said that where data rests is where opportunities will be created, right? Now, there's a lot of big investments, as you mentioned, in the data industry. And in Ireland seems to become one of the world's biggest data center, if not the biggest, and attract a new generation of international professionals. A lot of startups are starting to settle down here. And we're talking about remote working. We see there's a lot of people who take the decision to move out of big cities because of the costs, and also a new generation of millennials and Gen Z joining the workforce. So what's your view on the way how we'll be working in the near future?
I mentioned earlier in the interview about my 10-year-old and my 16-year-old, and I just see by them that stuff that's there when you're born is not technology. So I even see between my 16 and my 10-year-old that Minecraft, for instance, came on the market. Somewhere in between the two of them. My 16-year-old had to learn how to use it. My 10-year-old just sees it as, okay, let's build that, let's do this. So their norms now are mobile, flexible. The system doesn't work always that quickly. And big companies particularly. I think startups have a great advantage because they've no legacy. They can create a culture. They can bring people who maybe are younger or they've been driven, and it becomes from day one. Bigger companies are hard to shift. Probably the best example at the moment of a big company that seems to shift its psychology is Microsoft.
Yes.
It seems anyway. I hope I haven't said they're your biggest competitor. But again, it takes a while to shift, particularly in traditional business, finance. They seem to be more. It nearly needs a flushing out of the people who are writing the checks and making the big decisions. And I'd say subdivisions, because technology won't be the inhibitor. Over the next 5 years, if that, you will have 5G and you'll have connectivity and you'll have all this stuff. You'll have devices that will allow you to do physically all these things. But psychologically, sometimes, in my experience anyway, change is something that isn't restricted by technology. It's usually by the guy or the girl who is making the decision to allow it to happen. But when it works through the system, it's a bit like cloud systems. 10 years ago. No, not secure enough. Not in enough regions. Really, it took a while for people to say, okay, you won't give me the money to uplift my new systems, but I have a smaller budget, therefore I'll go for a bit of cloud,
yes,
a bit of on-premise. And eventually people, then it's a great decision.
Came
You're
around
a genius,
the idea,
it came
yes.
around. But there's no doubt that I'm sure Simon and some of the other guys have been around when we heard first the bring your own device, all this type of stuff. Oh no, security and all the rest of it. But then you realise that there's no point to being an organisation that has terminals when they've just learnt in college to use tablets all the time.
Yes, that's why.
So it made sense. Well, just give them an interface, and then we don't have. So it takes a while because we're all sort of semi-sheep. And everybody is constantly, and I'm learning this more now than I ever did in my whole career, that people have internal reputations and risks. And startups are, I won't say it's easy, but it's easier than with big companies. I don't think that technology will be the inhibitors. I think security is always going to be a challenge.
Of course, yeah.
Security, privacy by design, security by design, is a real challenge, and that's, I guess, what some of the stuff we spoke about earlier is that when you do it from the start, it's easier.
Yeah.
Retrospectively, we spoke about COBOL earlier. There are things being propped up in the world still by COBOL. I don't even know if there's many COBOL programmers still operating. Oh, don't touch that in the corner. Leave that. It seems to be doing something, but we don't want to turn it off. So, but there's always transition, isn't there?
Of course, yeah.
And once
people
we
are afraid
listen,
of the unknown.
Yeah, but I think we got to keep listening, not just hearing stuff, actually listening. That's one of the things I learn more and more, is that when I was a young kid, I absolutely know that the managers weren't listening. They were the odd guy you met.
Mm-hmm.
But now I think people are getting better at actually hearing, not just listening.
Yeah.
And because they're hearing it all over. Case in point is that young girl in Norway. She's just started an incredible tsunami of awareness that no amount of politicians and no amount of leaders.
Greta, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the power of social media. It's the power of
younger
generation getting behind something.
Absolutely.
So I think ultimately it's in saying that, we still have strange administrations in North America and in the UK in terms of the government, but it takes a while to change sentiment. But I think it's in the right trajectory. I do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask you one last question, really. Is there any other secret project maybe, that you'd like to share with our audience?
Secret project?
Anything that you'd like to share with our audience before we finish the interview? We're always keen to get to know.
We're constantly... Well, actually, it's timely because we have a real problem with bees. There's a real problem with these little bee fellas, right? And I've been doing a lot of research recently about the effects of biodiversity. And it's amazing. These little bees are responsible for... If we lost all the bees in the world, we'd lose all of our habitats in 100 years. And Ireland has, and I think it's the same around 30% of all the bees will be, what's the word I'm looking for? Will be extinct if we continue to decimate their natural habitats, right? And they then pollinate all the food, and they pollinate this, that and the other. So that's the only interesting project I'm working at the moment. It's called DCs for Bees. And effectively, we're going to try and, because there's an awful lot of land around data centres. It's just by their nature. So we're going to see, can we actually get an awful lot more beehives and stuff around those areas. But the other thing that I really am fascinated about is DNA. And not from the point of cloning people. We can't, the data in the world is just, another example I use often is the first iPhone is 11 years old.
Yes.
And it was the maximum, the top end was a 4 gig. Now we go forward one decade, and I think they have a 5112 and a terabyte. Right, so that gives you a sense.
It's incredible.
It's not controllable, even if we do renewable energy it, and even if we do. So what we're starting to see now, which is frightening and exciting in the same sentence, is that there are trials, successful trials, where they're actually putting data, static data, on DNA, and it uses about 1/10 of 1% of the energy needed per megabyte.
Wow.
And if we can get to the stage, particularly for archive data, of which we will have so much, that I think that's blended with the solution of just more efficient traditional storage.
Yes.
For my industry, I think over the next 10 years, DNA storage is just going to be...
It's going to become huge, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's starting to see, I think that's what somebody defined as the fourth industrial revolution, is where the tools will be there for any industry, for any person, whether you have a degree or not. That's the other thing I was going to say to you. It's really interesting to see now Google and some of the big companies are dropping degree as a entry requirement. If you've talent, come and talk to us. How brilliant is that?
It is fascinating, yeah.
To me, that's
huge.
It's
change.
huge,
Yeah.
So now what you've got is that you may not have been lucky enough to have an education.
But if you're talented.
If you're talented
Sure.
and you have access, that's fundamentally great. And that's one of the things I love about this type of interview or walking around Dublin City is it's such diverse. People on scooters, people on mopeds, some of them even not breaking the law, which is great. But it's a changeable space, isn't it, in Dublin? How long are you in Dublin?
4 years.
4 years. So
Yes.
you've seen a
I've
massive
seen
change.
a change already, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Changes, everything changes at such a fast pace nowadays, every year. And yeah, I do see quite a change since I arrived. It feels weird. It's only 4 years, really, but
But I think there's also challenges of success.
yes.
There's challenges of success around accommodation and people
Yes.
wanting to stay in the centre of the city. But you know what? I had this discussion recently. I've had challenges, and most people who've been around a while have had challenges both sides, both of success and failure. And I just think that the challenges of success are much better cracked to solve than challenges of failure. So I prefer to be looking at Dublin where we have to build more
Yes.
and we have to get more accommodation, we have to sort this. Then what are we going to do with all of these young people who are emigrating and may not come back? Because that's heartbreaking on a physical, societal level.
Absolutely.
And now what we're trying to do is actually correct the challenges of success.
The current.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to place and a better place to be. So I think DNA, I think that's fascinating,
It is
but scary.
fascinating. It is a bit scary, yes.
Yeah.
Who knows? Well, Garry, thank you so much. It's
You're
been an
very
absolute
welcome.
pleasure, as
Yeah,
usual, to see
thank
you.
you.
Thank you for your time today. Thank you for spending time with us and sharing all the great work that you do and your other projects on the
Yeah,
side.
thank you so much.
So it is the end of today's show, unfortunately, with Garry Connolly from Host in Ireland. Please make sure to tune in again for more VistaTalks. And obviously we'll be discussing more interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you.